How consciousness connects to human history. The non-dualistic view of history focuses on the evolution of human consciousness, considering its moral and spiritual unfoldment and the impact of its flowering on socioeconomic structures. I define consciousness as the total psyche of the human being, the conscious, unconscious, and superconscious within man. As history progresses, this sometimes unified, sometimes fractured entity evolves towards new horizons as external structures mold the human soul according to the contours of each historical epoch, and as inner consciousness works itself into society through culture and creative works. Roughly designating 4 stages of history, human consciousness progresses through 3 stages of internalization. 1. Slave consciousness, a psychological form tied to the material world, driven by unconscious instincts and completely controlled by inner forces such as egoic thought and social forces such as power and money. This is the dark side of the force. 2. Freedom consciousness, a psychological and spiritual form arising from the power of the self-aware mind. It emerges as outer and inner forces provide support for the creation of inner will and dualistic thought. It cultivates one's free will by detaching from and consciously manipulating human nature and external structures. This is the light side of the force. 3. Non-dualistic consciousness, a consciousness that is spiritual in essence. It is the transcendence of external events as dualistic mind and free will disappear into pure being. This is the true unity of the force, which is ultimately the light beyond light and darkness, the order beyond order and chaos. Tied to these stages occurs the development of morality and religion, moving through early, dualistic, modern, and non-dualistic stages of history. Initially, the inner being of man is undefined during the early era because it lives in undifferentiated unity with nature. No free will exists because consciousness is immediately directed outward into physical reality. Yet all this changes when thought and consciousness solidify in the human psyche around 50,000 years ago. The evolution of modern humans gives rise to spiritual growth as empathy and being begin to deeply unite the tribes of the early era. Dualistic solidification occurs when human civilization enters the agrarian era, when power structures forms, dividing rich nobles from poor farmers, and as slave consciousness arises through dominance and the establishment of hierarchy. The peasant realizes and is made to accept an inferior status in society, while the noble believes in his or her natural superiority by monopolizing economic and political power. The dualistic human defines himself according to the material sphere, since little education, rigid class distinctions, and traditional religion externally impose duality upon consciousness. The quality of consciousness is not freely chosen in this age, therefore free will is destroyed by the power of the other. Such material relations shape the moral and religious doctrines of the dualistic era. Since man is unable to detach consciousness from the material sphere, religion speaks to this sphere in order to give rise to moral action. All major religions promise good karma or eternal happiness in return for faith and obedience. They engage the imaginative capacities of man. They tell fantastic tales about bliss in heaven or eternal torment in hell. Although these stories produce powerful emotions of greed and fear, they don't create truly moral human beings. If moral action depends on fear or reward, then you're being good only on the basis of bribes and threats. Morality isn't based on inner conviction, and so immorality occurs the moment authority and belief disappear. This level of religion is the most material and objective. It is defined by the slave consciousness, which only cares for the gratification of the senses. Fortunately, moral development allows us to transcend such slavish materialism. Notice your own children, how they are not only good because they fear punishment, but also because they want to be loved. We are all of us social animals. The desire for acceptance is hardwired into our genes. It is common to see a mother give up her own happiness to make her child happy. Such behaviors are partially instinctive, yet they break down the barrier between self and other. When this non-dualistic crossing merges with the dualistic mind, the human race develops a freedom consciousness. The free human thinks about good versus evil and self versus other. Freedom consciousness births the concrete soul in man, allowing him to utilize reason to come to individualized moral decisions. It allows him to use the conscious soul to tame the animal body. Once a person becomes truly aware of duality, it is up to them to decide where the line is drawn. Such awareness does not immediately imply morality, however, but opens the door for the conscious choice between good and evil. We only have the chance to actualize the idea of the good. Freedom means detachment from social forces and power over the contents of your consciousness. It's the only condition in which true moral choice and moral responsibility exist. The slave consciousness evolves towards the freedom consciousness as the force of history utilizes a dualistic age to transition humanity from a less conscious early age to a more conscious modern age. The steps towards freedom begin as early as the first stages of history, though they only gain momentum in recent centuries, due to the emergence of religion, tribes, agriculture, industry, mass education, reason, meditation, science, technology, democracy, human rights, and modern law. A freedom consciousness has come to dominate much of the modern world. This freedom is power over one's being and over nature, but power is a double-edged sword. Due to technological power over nature, man grows in his ability to act both morally and immorally, to create happiness and cause suffering. Since this awareness of mind and duality solidifies boundaries between cultures and nations, the free human often decides that division is the only way to view the world, forcing the soul into the mind and body as it observes good and evil through a film of dualistic thoughts and belief systems that only strengthen the egoic self versus the other. One equates the self with good and the other with evil. Instead of thinking according to the opposites of duality and non-duality, seeing the many as bad and the one as good, the natural empathy and unity between self and other is forgotten. Duality creates the individual and cultural ego, and this division leads to suffering and warfare that only grows worse as we enter the modern era. Historically, this fallen form of freedom consciousness disappears as world civilization evolves towards the non-dualistic era. Instead of observing duality and falling below it, real moral freedom grows in the rational soul as the individual begins to truly contemplate the meaning of morality. This moral freedom does not rely on religion for its dictates because traditional religions don't speak to the full range of human consciousness. Humans are not mere sheep. We possess powers beyond simplistic morality and blind obedience to God's laws. Reason and critical thought quickly undermine the tenets behind every religion. The most important question to the rational mind is, how do you know for sure? Such thoughts quickly turn to question religious morality. What if I am forced to steal food because I am sick, hungry, and poor? Does that make it immoral? There grows an understanding of the contextual nature of moral judgment. The mind no longer takes things as black and white. It becomes aware of the grays in reality and the limits of morality. Duality transforms into non-duality as pluralism and tolerance bind together self and other. Unfortunately, pitfalls emerge because such moral awareness injects an element of chaos into thinking. The rational mind realizes that there are many standards upon which to base moral judgment. It's mind-numbing to consider all the perspectives, theories, values, and ideals that go into any moral situation. Often this forces people into moral relativism. If everything is gray, then there is no right or wrong. If everyone has their own standards of judgment, then who am I to impose my standards upon another? Although freedom allows humans to create self-conscious moral principles to live by, the dualistic nature of freedom also creates deep divergences in moral thought. Ultimately, freedom is the freedom to think and choose for oneself. Reason allows us to mold the fabric of consciousness, giving it an inherent perfectibility, an ability to learn and grow instead of being beholden to our instinctual patterns. Yet reason naturally creates dualistic moral ideas because the material world is all it really knows. So long as the human mind drags the moral soul into thought, a freedom consciousness cannot see beyond its belief systems, creating divisions between religions and peoples. But free will is also the source of true morality in man because reason is potentially a unifying force in consciousness. If a freedom consciousness looks upwards, then it transforms and evolves into the non-dualistic consciousness. The human soul moves from choosing good to consciously being good. Freedom vanishes as thought is transcended and replaced by the force. No matter the truth behind any moral theory, non-dualistic being sees that the rational mind breaks the world into this or that value judgment. The end of moral growth occurs when dualistic thought goes beyond itself and imbues itself into non-dualistic being. The self gives way to empathize with the other. Subject merges into object. Enlightened souls climb out of the material and into the timeless, eternal force, thereby bringing light back into the darkness of the material world. Whether you call it love, transcendence, or empathy, such morality is non-dualistic in essence. It is not goodness motivated by past interactions or future results, but goodness for the sake of itself, or actions sprung from the now. This goodness connects the timeless with time, the infinite with the finite. From the non-dualistic soul springs the values and virtues of non-duality as a principle. Such virtue is the basis of true morality. This is why Jesus says to love thy neighbor as thyself. It is why Buddha asks us to consider others as yourself. It is the reason sages of every religion give selflessly to the world around them. They go beyond selfhood and commune with the other side of things. The true basis of every religion springs from this ideal. True sages teach the simplest of things. It is about oneness. It is about seeing the fundamental connection between all things. If this transformation is achieved by enough people, the human race will experience a revolution on a scale that has yet to be seen on this planet. The social, political, and economic structures operating through human history will radically transform. Division will disappear. The powerful will give way to the powerless. The rich will enter into empathic unity with the poor, and humanity will take one huge leap towards perfection. Enlightenment is experienced as a profound shift, a leap in human consciousness. As the bird evolves flight, so must man move on to a higher plane of living if we are to survive as a world civilization. And though it exists in different ways for different cultures, every part of the world speaks of transcendence, love, and empathy in one way or another. In every culture, there are people who embody the ideal of non-duality, people who connect to the world around them, people who cross the divide between self and other. This form of being naturally creates a better world. It is a unified consciousness that embodies true goodness and light. Yet such goodness does not require total enlightenment, since enlightenment is itself a very vague term. Everybody does not have to be a Buddha to save the world. During my own ascetic phase, I did not just sit under a tree and meditate. I also thought about things. And while some desire subsided with time, my desire to make a difference did not. I knew too much. I had read too many articles on economics, poverty, war, politics, culture, evolution, philosophy, and happiness. I had looked into all of the world religions and observed their fundamental unity. But why did God not solve our problems? Despite all of our prayers, there still exist terrible injustices in the world today. After a time, I realized that it's because duality is an intrinsic and inescapable part of existence. If there is a being, then there must be non-being. If there is good, then of course there is evil. Nothing in the universe can exist without its opposite. Non-duality creates duality. Just as duality gives rise to non-duality. God is the infinite one that creates the oppositions so fundamental to existence, and it is the task of humanity to move as close to this line as possible. Yet this line does not mean that we can theoretically know God. The great traditions speak of the source which exists beyond ordinary human experience. The Apocryphon of John says that the all, the one, is without border or limits. The Upanishads speak of Brahman as beyond that which is and that which is not. Lao Tzu states that the Tao is undying and without name. The Lankavatra Sutra says the universal mind is beyond birth, death, and all dualistic concepts. Mahatma Gandhi writes that we are all thinking of the unthinkable, describing the indescribable, seeking to know the unknown, and that is why our speech falters. Instead of some mental concept, God is an infinitely subtle and paradoxical suchness. Non-being is being because it defines itself as non-being. God exists as being, non-being, and beyond. The infinite non-dual within and beyond all dualistic phenomena. And yet God is neither being, nor non-being, nor beyond. That is, an infinite point of nothingness from which the Big Bang springs. This paradoxical truth is too much for the human mind to grasp. So as usual, we must turn to enlightened teachers who point the way not by using certain words, but by conveying the spiritual essence through whatever words they use. When the divine vision is attained, all appear equal, and there remains no distinction of good and bad or of high and low. If you must be mad, be it not for the things of the world. Be mad with the love of God. Thank you.